Call the meeting to order. Ms. Superintendent. All right. Call the meeting to order. The Capital Needs and Facilities Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, December 11th. I'm Billy Orgel. Let's start over to my left. Ms. Jones would do. So Ms. Jones, she's got what do you call that? Where you can't talk? Laryngitis. She couldn't speak. She's here. Superintendent Hobson, Scott McCormick. Thank you. Billy Orgel.
Michelle McKissick.
Lynn Johnson.
Yes.
Michelle. Anybody else? Let's see. Thank you to staff. They gave us a little different setup today. If you're on that side of the room and you're not media, you might want to move to this side of the room. I'm just kidding with you. You might want to move over here, and it's just so you can see better, because I don't know if you can get the same vision over there. Can y'all see with the cameras? Do you want to move somewhere else? If y'all want to, move somewhere else. Oh, that's the media square or circle? Okay. I can't see him. Okay. With that, let me call on Ms. Phelan to discuss the footprint analysis.
Thank you. I think Superintendent Hobson wanted to make some comments before we started the discussion.
Superintendent Hobson. You got to do the whole thing.
Thank you, board members. First, I really just want to thank Beth and her team for doing a really extraordinary job and really analyzing the data around our facilities and bringing a plan for the board to consider that would do a few things. First and foremost, there's been a lot of headlines leading up to this talking about school closures. This really, in our judgment, is really a plan to build new schools in particular areas in inner city Memphis. What this will do, obviously for the board's consideration, is a few things. First, it would put about 15,000 kids in brand new facilities. Secondly, it would save upwards of $20 million a year from our general fund budget. And then thirdly, it would eliminate about $100 million in deferred maintenance. And Beth's going to tell you about the process and how we got here and talk more about the schools. But I hope that what we really want to do for the board's consideration, because as the board knows, the county commission has been asking for a quote-unquote footprint plan for 2 years. I know the board has been asking for our best thinking around this. So I didn't want to leave the district and leave this matter outstanding. And then we'll just kind of take direction from the board around next steps. There is a specific ask in here because, as Beth will tell you, in order to make all this work, there's some rezoning that needs to happen, some of which the board has asked specifically for. We need to get a commitment from the county commission to fund all of these new facilities in order to make the configurations work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Beth for the specifics, and we'll certainly be available to answer any questions. I'll turn it back over to you, Chairman Orgel, if you want to turn it back over to Beth.
Thank you. Okay, on slide 4, and we're going to talk you through the approach that we used to conduct the analysis. And as you can imagine, it's a complicated study, and we wanted to be really methodical about how we did it. And the first approach, on the approach sector of the slide, the first thing that we focused on was student assignment. So the objective was to rezone students closer to their homes, and we focused on the students that were transported the furthest distance. And then we went into, as you would imagine, looking at the upcoming developments around the district and made sure that we could project future capacity that we would need to house the students that we were rezoning back to their neighborhood schools. Then we used the building conditions, and, the prevailing thought was that we would try to eliminate as many high FCI, poor condition buildings as we were going across our analysis. And then lastly, the last criteria was enrollment and utilization. And the thought there was move low enrolled and highly underutilized schools, to other additions or new builds. And throughout that approach, what we kept in mind as a consideration was if there was an opportunity to move students to higher performing schools, that's what we did. And if if we had to use additions where there wasn't the opportunity to build new, or we didn't need full capacity of a new school, we used several additions in our program as well. The bottom of the slide in the material that you're looking at highlights some of the challenges. The two main challenges were the number of high FCI or poor building condition schools that we have, and 30% of those schools, 30% of our schools are in poor or fair condition buildings. And you can see the stack bar to the right kind of shows the number of schools that we have is 140. We've got 29 in poor condition and 12 in fair condition. The other main challenge was utilization. That's the next stacked bar chart to the right. And what we're noting here is that there's 56% of schools that are significantly overcrowded or underutilized. So you can see out of the number of schools we have a high amount that are either over capacity or under capacity. Moving on to slide 5. This is a summary of the preliminary results in terms of the entire program. Starting from left to right, you can see the type of school, elementary, middle, and high. We currently have 140 schools. Our program, that we're proposing via our analysis is a new build of 10 schools. That includes the 2 that are already in progress, Elsie and Goodlet. It also includes 5 additions for elementary and 1 middle, and rezonings of 22 rezonings, 6 reconfigurations, and then 28 consolidations. And then the post-proposal, we would have a total of 123 schools. These are SCS direct run schools only. And so we wanted to outline for the board, where we are in our current analysis. The bullets that are on below highlight the work in progress that we still need to complete as part of this analysis. So we have to continue to analyze the remaining buildings that are left that are still high FCI. So even though we went through rezoning and also the projection of future capacity, we still have a number of buildings that have high FCI or are in poor condition. So to complete our analysis, we have to study those and then make recommendations to improve the condition of deferred maintenance in those buildings. We still have to consider the requirements of our alternative schools and CCTE schools. And then we have several recommended options that we still have to close out in terms of, this or that, or various options that we still have to work through. Yes.
So, because we have some new board members and there are a lot of acronyms, let's not use acronyms. When you use an acronym, let's say what it is, please.
Okay. So FCI is Facility Condition Index, and that's a percentage rating of the condition of the building. Low numbers, we tend to qualify poor between 17 and 20%, and that's when we start to watch schools around 15, 17%. When it hits 20, it's in a poor condition. So high numbers are worse. CCTE is, I don't remember the critical, career college technical education. All right? Okay, and then we're on the bullet of develop ASD Achievement School District consolidation plan. So the thought here is that, the ASD schools are in SCS buildings, and so they are also underutilized, and some of them are under-enrolled. So we would like to analyze that as well and make a recommendation in terms of optimization, because we still maintain those buildings from a capital investment standpoint. We have one, we also want to include in our analysis and cost projection is a demolition plan. So as we go through and do consolidations, we want to make sure that we estimate and outline the need for demolition so we can be good community partners and make plans to demolish the empty buildings. We also have a campus concept that we'll talk through as we go through the storyboards here in terms of this analysis. We have the Raleigh, Egypt area that already has a shared school environment. We want to try to prove out using a campus, K through 12 campus type of scenario. And we need to do a little bit more work in terms of how that might be designed and how that may look. The thought is that children would come and stay on the same campus, K through 12, and we need to figure out how to lay those buildings out so we can optimize the square footage, but also take into consideration any concerns that the board or the community may have. It's a new concept. We want to prove through it. We'll bring back feedback to the board, and it may be the first campus of its kind across the country. We thought it might be good to make recommendations to the board for innovation in that manner. We have to project all the costs and the savings of the program. So, we still have a lot of work in process that's going to impact the cost projections and also the savings projections. That obviously the intent of savings is to enable more investment into schools to address equity situations, in buildings and in education. And then the last bullet is to create an initial view of the timing of this program. And, as we start to move forward and talking with the board about funding and the county about funding, the time frame would be based on that funding. And so we're saying it could be a 5 to 10 year program, but obviously it depends on how much funding is identified, and then the time would be extended to, to line up with the funding that's available. And so now what we'd like to do, starting with slide 6, is these storyboards are set up in terms of the layering of how we did the analysis. So Michelle's going to just step you through the rezonings and some of the major activities that we had to consider when we were going through and developing the preliminary recommendations for the program. So if you can't see board members, you're welcome to, get closer to the board so you can actually see the information. Also, we can follow along with the slides because you'll see, everything that Michelle will be talking through is highlighted on the respective slides, starting on slide 6. If we can hear you.
No, I'll just.
I'm going to let, so Michelle, we're going to let you go on slide 6, and then when you're done with slide 6, I'm going to make sure that's what's after, because I hadn't seen this either. Okay, when you're done with slide 6, then we're going to entertain questions, and then we'll go to the next. So wait till page 9? Is that good? Okay. Let me do the rezoning. We'll hit it this way. Then we'll do the rezonings way. Ask questions. That's good. Okay, great.
Okay. So as Beth said, we started with the rezonings, trying to get students back in schools that are closer to their homes, because as many of you have asked me to do, you wanted to see the maps of where the students live and where the students are going. So that's what we made for you. So on these maps, these colored regions are the planning regions that we use in my department to plan. They're almost synonymous with the city of Memphis's planning regions, and we did it that way on purpose so that when we're monitoring development and whatnot, we can work in concert with the city. So you might not be able to see it, but there are dots all over the map, and that's the geocoded students, and that's where the students actually live. These black circles are where the students live. The red arrow is where they are currently being bused to school. The green arrow is where we are suggesting they be rezoned to. So if you look up here, we have a whole lot of them. These students, this is the elementary school level, so you're looking at students that live right here. They're bused up to Lucy to school. We're suggesting they come back to Egypt Elementary. These students right here are bused all the way out to Barrett's Chapel. We're suggesting they also come home to Egypt Elementary.
board 7
Yep.
distinction. We don't bus people, we transport them. The court-ordered busing ended.
The students
Yeah.
we transport. So
Yeah.
these students
And they're not
here-
interchangeable, so I wanted to make sure we,
Okay, got it. These students live right here, and they're transported to Dexter Elementary. We're suggesting Brownsville Road is right here, next to their home. These are the students that live around Shelby Farms. They're currently transported into White Station Elementary and Shady Grove Elementary. We're suggesting that the Dexters are right here. Down here, we have some students that are currently going down to Germantown, but there are no roads connecting this neighborhood to this direction, so they're actually driving up toward Cordova already and then coming around and going down. So they would just be closer in driving distance to Cordova Elementary. Down here, we have some odd zones that force children that are currently at Southwind, but they live closer to Highland Oaks, and we have kids at Highland Oaks who actually live closer to Southwind, so we were fixing that. And then this one is the Oak Haven area residents, but they're being transported all the way over here to Ross, so it's just sending them north to Oak Haven Elementary, closer to their home. And finally, the final elementary one is here, and these are the students that live over in the Sheffield Getwell area, and this was actually suggested when we first suggested the building of the new Goodlet Elementary, because we were going to just kind of try to help that whole little area of those 4 schools. What you'll also notice on this map is there's some little blue, they look like little blue houses, and these are the residential developments that are proposed around the county, residential developments that have a significant number of units that we want to make sure in the future, if they do actually come to pass, that we have capacity for them. So I'll move to middle, but let me get my water.
I think, board members, these rezonings, I think there'll be 2 different kinds that we can do now, and we'll recommend, and then kinds that we are going to need to do as part of the broader facilities plan. But I do want to note that most of these rezonings are rezonings that the board has talked about for years. I think the board has been really consistent about getting kids back closer to their homes. Some of this stuff you see is a result of old DSEG plans. It's a result of the merger and people saying they didn't want to go to different legacy schools that happened 5 years ago. So this was purely based on how do we get kids closer to their homes and be more efficient doing it.
So on the slide, the proposed FY 19-20 are on the left, and then the quadrant on the right requires new building or addition, so that's the delineation.
So at the middle school level, you'll notice it's a lot of the same exact areas that we dealt with in the elementary school level. This area here is bused to Woodstock for middle and Barrett's Chapel K-8 for middle. Here, where it was Brownsville Road Elementary over there, it's Craigmont Middle that they're actually closer to over here, but they're going all the way down to the Dexters. Again, we do transport children from out by the Dexters into White Station Middle currently. Same issue with Cordova Middle that we had over here with Cordova Elementary, is there are no roads leading down here, so they're going up already. There's a little stretch of what's the city limits actually right here. So we, before we actually merged, we couldn't, we had no place to accommodate these children that were out here, so they went all the way into Cape Bond Middle, but they're actually closer to Mount Pisgah Middle. And then again, down here in this area, you'll see that these kids that live right here, this is 385, they're transported up to Germantown Middle when Highland Oaks Middle is right here. And finally, for the rezonings, this is the high school map. Again, the same areas. So these children here are now transported out to Bolton to high school, and we're suggesting bringing them home to Raleigh Egypt High School and Craigmont High School, which are right here. This big rural patch out here currently is transported into Tresident High School. We're suggesting that they also be transported to a Raleigh, Egypt area so that we can clean up these feeder patterns up here, so we're not sending kids to a bunch of different high schools when they're all up there in that same area. This is the area where the children live near Melrose, Ms. Coleman, that we discussed, and they're currently being transported over to White Station High School, and the suggestion was that they should just be zoned to Melrose High School. And then finally, we have the same issue down here as we did at the middle school level. These students live basically across the street from Southwind High School, and they're being sent to school. They're zoned up to Germantown High School. So the suggestion was to rezone that area too.
All right. Open it up to questions. Just raise your hand because we don't have the things. Ms. Love.
Who am I asking questions to, Beth or you? Okay. So when we talk about rezoning the students from North Haven to Woodstock, are you saying you're going to close North Haven down?
The consolidations are actually the next slides in the deck. We haven't gotten to
What
them.
page are you on?
6.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We're just on the rezonings right now.
Okay, I guess I'm reading too fast. Okay, go ahead.
Did you read you read the end of the book before you read the
Anybody else?
Wants to
other
continue?
questions?
Okay.
Ms. Jones?
I know that we've talked about rezoning before, so are you, and we've done rezoning before, so are you proposing to do this in 1 year? Are you proposing to allow children who are already in these schools to end those grades?
If you look on that page 6, I believe the table on the left are the schools that we could do with the capacity that we have now. And they would be the proposed for next year. The ones on the right are schools that we actually can't rezone right now with the capacity that we have, and we would need to build a building or build an addition to accommodate them.
So my question was more not to capacity, but I know that's a concern, but consideration of these children and these parents who bought homes, who have invested in a school, have friends, have relationships. And so I know that always comes up when we have rezoning. And so is it strictly just on numbers, just what looks good on numbers, or is there some consideration going to be given to these kids who in the middle of a middle school, and they've got 2 more years or whatever, just send them to a new school right away? Or are those kids going to be allowed to finish the end grade where they are?
So, Ms. Jones, as we talked about it, what we talked about was, I mean, obviously, the board will be the decision maker, but we talked about for the high school kids to allow them to stay in the school until they graduated. For example, I know we've been a lot of talk around the Melrose White Station. I mean, if you're 11th grader, 12th grader, you know, we would, through the choice transfer, give kids the opportunity to stay and finish out the school year. Or finish out their term in the school. And I think for the people who would be, say, the rising 9th graders and beyond, we wouldn't make that option available except through, you know, the normal choice transfer process.
So you wouldn't, they'd just be rezoned, but they'd have to qualify under a choice transfer to stay where they are.
No, I think so. If I'm in 11th grade, right, and I'm going to be now rezoned back to Melrose, but I'm at White Station, we would allow you to stay there through your until you graduated. You know, you wouldn't have to go through the process.
That's what I was asking.
But other people obviously can always go through the process.
So, thank you, Mr. Orger. Superintendent, so this question is more so around the conversation that you just mentioned regarding high school rezoning. And if we're saying we're going to be touching the incoming ninth graders, when you talk about those kids from White Station to Melrose and Germantown to Southwind, within that, I'm sure then you've had conversations around, well, what does new programming look like in those high schools in order to be able to keep them in those buildings? Because I think the main thing about it's more than just rezoning to make someone show up in a building. So for me, it will be, I would want to see a plan around what are you doing to make sure you have additional resources, programming, other things in which if I'm going to leave one building that's been offering X, Y, Z, then I need to know when I get to this new building, I still have that. So I would want to see that plan.
So I think that, and I'll give, Board Member Coleman a lot of credit, who's been working with the Orange Mound community, particularly around that. I think that's a non-negotiable, I think, for Board Member Coleman if it moves forward, and I'm sure for this board, and also for Orange Mound too. It can't just be, let's stick a bunch of kids back in another building. Part of the challenge that we've seen for the last 6 years is that when you don't have a critical mass of kids, it's harder to offer additional programming. So when you're able to bring in another 250, 300 kids back into Melrose, then that will allow for additional academic supports and programs. But I think the key, and I guess what the staff will take their key on, is if it's something the board wants to continue to explore, then certainly if you're going to bring an influx of kids in, you have to make sure we have the support there too.
Page 6, Lucy to Egypt. I can't really see on the map. So are you saying all students that attend Lucy, or are you only speaking of after you cross over New Allen?
So no, just the students that live in that circle right there by Lucy.
I can't see that.
Okay, this is Lucy School.
Mm-hmm.
This is Egypt. Here, let me just take it.
It's okay.
So that's Lucy Elementary, the green dot up there.
Mm-hmm.
This is Egypt Elementary right here.
Mm-hmm.
So these kids that live inside this black circle are currently riding a bus up there when Egypt is right there.
Okay, so my question is, this is after you cross, if you're in Millington and you're coming into Raleigh, after you cross New Allen, are you saying all of those babies?
Can I give you a map of this area for you? So this is Raleigh Millington right here.
Okay.
And this is Singleton Parkway.
Okay.
So Old Brownsville comes in here and turns down.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know about where that is, where Old Brownsville kind of does that bend?
I live in the Lucy area, so
Okay.
yeah, I know.
So right there.
Okay, so just Brownsville, Egypt Central.
Raleigh Millington, the Egypt Central kids, these kids right here are already down there, but these kids right here.
So when we talk about Raleigh Millington Road, what I'm asking is this after you cross over New Allen or before? So,
I'm not sure exactly where New Allen is up here.
okay,
This
so,
is Raleigh Millington right here.
okay. So Raleigh Millington goes into Millington and it comes out of Millington going into Raleigh.
Right?
At that three-way intersection is New Allen where the gas station is.
That.
And then you have a couple trailer parks.
There's your intersection right there. So anybody who lives down here, it's like south of Old Brownsville Road, is
Okay.
going to be rezoned back down here.
Okay.
These kids who live up here by Lucy would still be
Still at Lucy.
Right.
Okay, and looking at the middle school, Grandview Heights to Douglas, these are only the children who live in the North Memphis area?
Correct.
Okay. No, I'm familiar with my entire district, yeah. One more question. Woodstock to Raleigh, Egypt. What area?
Woodstock to Raleigh, Egypt. So these kids that live in this circle, it's the same kids we were just talking about that are the Lucy kids. Are going out to Woodstock right now. They're coming up.
So basically, this is Legacy Shelby County.
Correct.
Okay. So
A lot of the stuff is on the outskirts of the current city limits.
okay, and Barish Chapel to Egypt, it's the same. Singleton Parkway, Egypt Central.
right? So Barrett's Chapel is this more oblong-looking circle,
Mhm.
and that's, again, this is Old Brownsville Road, and this is Singleton. So
Okay.
those are different right there.
But this also includes Egypt Central, right? Okay.
Yeah, everybody that lives down here is being taken back down here.
So will there be, how many students who live in that area are bused to Barrett's? Because it seems like we're going to empty out Barrett's Chapel Elementary.
Right, the enrollment at Barrett's Chapel Elementary is something that we've been talking about as we've been doing this, because they'll end up with about, after all of that happens, with about 300 kids.
So are you going to keep the school? Is there going to be a recommendation to keep that school open?
We don't have a recommendation around Barrett's right now, but it's a conversation that we need to have. Right,
Staying open, okay.
yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, let me hit another board member, Ms. McKissick.
Okay, I got one more question.
Let me,
Yeah, let me jump in there just for a second.
Okay.
This one's a quick question. I'm just curious regarding the White Station to Melrose move, because ironically, I ran into a graduate of Melrose, and he was speaking on this very issue. So what would that bring the capacity of Melrose up to? What is it now, and what would that become?
Hold on just a second.
Ms. Coleman knows, let Ms. Coleman answer.
Oh, okay.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
The co- Right now, it's almost 600 students. That's all that Melrose has right now. And to bring in, it would be less than 250 more students that would be impacted by the move.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Bolton to Craigmont, are those the students who live in the Lucy area and Egypt Central, Old Brownsville?
Yeah, so it's these same kids. Old Brownsville, this Austin P that's shooting way out like
Yeah.
that. And Old Brownsville runs right through it. This is Billy Mayer Road.
Mm-hmm.
So it's these kids that are on the east side of Austin P.
Okay, so what about the students that are bused from North Haven to Bolton?
The students right now, these students that live in North Haven are bused into Tresvant. These students living up here by Lucy Elementary are the ones that are being bused over to Bolton. Transported.
To Bolton. So they will be, will they still be, they won't be transported, they'll go to Raleigh,
They'll
Egypt?
go to Raleigh, Egypt.
Okay,
Well,
Board members, we also, I know it's a lot, and, you know, these recommendations, we want to ask, I think sometime in January if it moves forward, so we certainly will make staff to be able to sit down and go over all this stuff in detail. I know you guys need to digest this, and then certainly we'll answer questions from here on out.
all right,
And,
so,
excuse me, one more. Only thing I'm going to suggest is that I know that we're looking at this, and there are schools that are not on this rezoning because they're not on the priority list, but I also think it's unfair for us to say that we're going to close some schools down because of the enrollment, but other schools, we're not. If we're going to look at this whole assessment, we need to look at all things. So even if we're taking students away, we need to look at how the enrollment will impact, how the rezoning will impact those schools. And maybe not today, but I'm just saying we need to look at everything, not just pockets of schools.
okay, so I want y'all to move on to slide 7, 8, 9, because they kind of go together because you're talking about building new campuses.
So that's this map. Would it be helpful if I moved it to the middle?
I don't know, I can't see it, I don't know if y'all can see, I can't see it
Y'all want me to
anyway.
move this map to the middle?
Whatever y'all want to do.
Can't see it.
I can't see it anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Follow along on the slide, so slide 7 is where we're at in terms of the summary that you did. So slide 7.
So slide 7 is the building of the new Woodstock K-8. You remember a couple years ago, it was suggested that we build a new Woodstock K-12, but we just found that there weren't enough high school kids living out there for that. So what we suggested was to combine E.E. Jeter, North Haven, and Lucy Elementaries and Woodstock Middle into one brand new school up there in that region.
I think that looks at everything, Ms. Love.
Slide 9 is to build a new Raleigh, Egypt campus. This is, Beth spoke of it earlier when she was talking about a new sort of design, school design of a campus design. Keeping the K through 12 kids all on one campus. As you know, they're K through 12 there right now. So keeping that as it is, and as you see on this first slide, it just deals with the 6 to 12 portion. The next slide's going to deal with your elementary portion. So the 6 through 12 portion rezones part of the Barrett's Chapel, which we already spoke of, and then consolidates part of the Woodstock Middle School kids that were living out here in the rural area. That was the cleaning up of that feeder pattern into the K-12 campus. We also keep all the current Raleigh Egypt students that are currently there at the school and consolidate Tresvant High School into the brand new campus. On that campus as well is the elementary aged students.
Slide 9 now. Yep.
That was rezoning those Barrett's Chapel K-8 students and consolidating the Lucy and Egypt elementary students all on that K-12 campus with the current Egypt elementary students.
Any questions?
This is going to go back to what one of my fellow board members stated. You know, I'm all for new buildings, but we are going to need a true, if this is what the board votes on, we're going to need a true, not only academic, but cultural competent plan. Because I want you guys to think about Raleigh and Tresvant, Raleigh, Egypt, and Tresvant, and all of the challenges that we already have, even with them playing sports against each other. So I'm all for new buildings, but I think we're going to have to be really sincere about the plan that we have and making sure that we're looking at all things, not just the fact that, you know, some of our students will have a new building. And then so the deferred maintenance, this is for Tresvant, not Raleigh, Egypt, right, Superintendent? On page 8.
On page 8, that is the Tresvant deferred maintenance.
Yes.
Okay. So do you have Raleigh, Egypt's?
The
Or is that-
Raleigh Egypt is the one underneath that, the 7.6 million.
Mm-hmm.
That's Raleigh Egypt.
Okay, so I have another question. The middle school campus, are you discussing tearing all of that down or salvaging the middle school campus, or?
We haven't gotten that far in the idea yet. This was just a.
We still have to prove through all that.
And so for Egypt Elementary, are you saying that you will build a new campus for Egypt Elementary?
The proposal is that all the K through 12 students there would all be in a new school on that campus.
Okay, schools or school?
That's part of the design thing that we haven't gotten
Okay,
to yet.
all right.
Any other?
You're contemplating?
Oh,
Is that Ms. Jones?
I guess it's the same general type question, but agreeing with board member Bibbs. I just remember the prior closings that rezonings we had, and the passion, the people in the community, the issues they brought up are still the same issues. The programming, what they're going to get. So for me, I would like to know, I would like a commitment, a plan that would have all of that, not that we're just going to rezone them, but tell us when these kids went to White Station Middle, they had these many courses. We are going to make the investment to make sure that those courses are still available for them at wherever you rezone them, and that's throughout. Not take them out of an environment where they've had access to certain programming and then put them in an environment where they no longer have that access. And so to me, it's all one. If we're going to rezone, we need to also roll in what the academic look like. They don't have this at this school because we're rezoning. All the children at the school now where they're going to be rezoned are going to benefit. So it makes sense. And then parents, to me, might not be as apt to say what they said in a lot of the other zoning. Well, I'm not going to go there. My child you can zone me, but I will not go. And my child had this at this school. That's what we plan for. That's what they want. And so I think it has to be a comprehensive, not only just numbers and FCI, but the additional programming, course by course. What was at the school they left, and how that is going to be transferred to where they're going.
I think this is part of why we want to get feedback from the board to hear about different, thoughts. And I think the point of the day, though, was just to share our thinking and take that feedback into account.
Anybody else? Do 10, 11, 12 go together? Or are they separate?
They're separate.
So 10's addressing additions.
Okay, let's
Yeah,
just do 10 and we'll get questions.
All right.
All right, so 10 takes us down to the Whitehaven area, the Southwest Planning Zone. And here we were looking at consolidating Oakshire and Garden View into additions at Whitehaven Elementary and Winchester Elementary, and then rezoning that whole area so that the new zones make more sense with the school locations as they would be if we consolidated those two schools. Oh, we also proposed that all deferred maintenance projects at those schools and renovations be completed.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Bibbs, please.
So if I look at where you're saying moving students from Oakshire, and it looks like if I look at Oakshire, Garden View, those two in particular, and moving them to either Whitehaven or Holmes Road, that then for Oakshire for sure will deplete that building.
That's when it says consolidation, that means that we would be.
Okay, so I'm just making sure on record that I'm seeing
That's correct.
Yes.
what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay. So when you look at a school like Garden View that was just a reward school and you're moving them around, you're saying your only reason is about the facility itself?
It's underutilized and it has a poor facility, so that's the reason it was looked at. If you remember the way that Beth went through how we looked at it, after we looked at the rezonings and getting kids closer and the capacity for that, we started looking at the poor building conditions.
Okay. So then if you look at moving kids into Winchester, then what's the academic plan for Winchester and the community program for Winchester, the additional programming that will happen, because at Garden View and at Robert R. Church, they're receiving those things.
Right, I believe that goes along with what Board Member Jones was just talking about, and that will be part of the continued work as we move through this project plan.
We'll our academic colleagues to bring those programs, outlines forward. And I think our intent is to try to, propose a plan for the board's consideration that makes us more efficient so we can drive more dollars and funding back into the classroom to address some of our equity issues in regards to programming and even facility condition.
I absolutely understand it from the facility point of view, but my question definitely is the broader question around when you're moving kids who are performing and who are pushing from a building. And I know we're saying that it's the facility itself, but we also got to be prepared to address their parents and that community around why this is possible other than just the building itself.
Absolutely, thank you.
So I know you said this is just the early stages. Have there been any conversations on the academic side to address some of these concerns, or just maybe kind of reiterate the purpose of showing us all of this today?
Dr. Burt, would you like to make any comments?
Nice jacket.
Some schools where, particularly high schools, they struggle when you think about advanced course offerings due to low student enrollment, not being able to get the teacher to be able to teach AP, IB, so on and so forth. So if you look at a high school that's 250, 275, and then you can merge a high school that only has 400 students, you have the higher opportunity of bringing in more teachers for those EOC courses. For some of the elementary schools, for example, Ms. Bibbs mentioned Garden View as a reward school. We also have a potential proposal with Winchester with a creative early literacy lab to do something different for that particular community, to where they will get a different way of education around 2-to-1 inside the classroom, low teacher-student ratio, so on and so forth. So a lot of the schools that's on the screen, even though it's a merger going in, it may be potentially be a merger that could really benefit the student around high-quality school offerings.
And I do think, if I could just add on, I do want to just continue to reiterate that we really want to present this at a high level. I know there'll be a lot of discussions around this, but I do want to get back to our thinking around purpose. 15,000 inner city kids in new learning facilities. And we know learning facilities matter. All you have to do is look over at Collierville, and you should have an opportunity to have a new school, whether you're in Orange Mound or Southeast Memphis or Collierville. I think also you're talking about $20 million back to your general fund budget that you can reallocate and do different things. You also address a lot of your manpower issue, and then you eliminate $100 million in deferred maintenance. So I think that all of these things that you're talking about are the right questions, and academics has been working with Beth's team and Lynn's team and George's team, so all the under the hood stuff is there. So, we could have come in here and done a 17-hour presentation to answer all these questions that we anticipated, but what we wanted to do at first was just lay it out, get your feedback, and I know over the next few weeks and months, all these discussions will continue. But again, I hope, because I know our media friends are here, some people have already tried to couch this, oh, you're closing a bunch of schools. No, you're building schools in inner city Memphis and putting kids who traditionally have been underserved and underrepresented in brand new learning facilities.
Let's go to slide 11, please.
So slide 11 is consolidate Shady Grove. If you remember back to the rezoning slides, there was the area that is currently being transported from the Dexter area above Shelby Farms into Shady Grove Elementary. So as we zone those kids back, we're left with very few students in the school. So those handful of students would be rezoned to White Station Elementary. And we would then consider a new use for that property.
So Shady Grove Elementary has, I'm adding up 234 students, or it has more students?
They have some choice transfer students there too, probably about 60.
234 plus 60, 294, and then there's some neighborhood children?
The 19.
Oh. So there's about 300 children at the school?
Right.
What's the capacity of the school?
Let me give you the exact number. The exact number with their pre-K and their special education programs included is 378.
What's the capacity of the school?
The capacity is 269. It's overcrowded at 141%, and there are some portables out back that kind of help mitigate that.
So there's 19 people that could walk to school, and the rest of the people we transport?
Correct. Or they're on a choice transfer and they transport themselves. Their parents bring them.
Do we know the zip codes where the choice transfers are coming from?
I can get them for you.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't know.
If it's like Richland or
Right.
White Station or
Yeah,
wherever.
we can get that definitely.
How much acreage is right there?
They're on about 9.5.
So we're transporting kids from close to Dexter Elementary, which is out there Macon Road area, to Shady Grove,
Correct.
like on the interstate, Oak Grove, Walnut Grove to wherever to get over there. Okay.
Right.
And then the neighborhood children have a choice, which could be White Station, Richland, or I guess that's your choice. Those are
Right,
your
or
choices.
any number of the private schools that are
Cranwood,
around there.
well, we don't want to go to private schools.
Yeah.
That costs us money. But anyway, and we've got good choices. So anyway, okay.
Mr. Orr, if I could ask a follow-up question, because I know we're just talking about the future plan here, but how did we get there? I know that probably could take another 2 meetings as well, but how do we find ourselves in a situation where we have a school like Shady Grove where we're taking kids from that far out and bringing them in to a school with only 19 kids are from the community there?
So before we were merged, when we were 2 districts, the Dexters were in Legacy-Shelby, and we had kids that lived out there, that lived in the city of Memphis, that we were responsible for educating at Legacy Memphis. So there was no school out there that was Legacy Memphis. The closest school in was Shady Grove. So it just existed that way the whole time that we were not merged. When we merged and Shelby County Schools became one, and we now were responsible for the Dexters as well, we have a place out there to put them with a little bit of reconfiguration and rezoning.
And so what I'll just ask Superintendent as well as Michelle is that in the future, because we've been merged I think about 5 years, 6 years now, is that these, when we see an opportunity to do the right thing, let's do it sooner than later. Like that's something I think we could have resolved years ago. It makes sense. You can, obviously go and have the community meetings, but I do think Superintendent Hobson is right that many of these are things that we've talked about for years, but I think as we move forward that we continue to bring these to us in a timely manner and address them head on.
Resolving takes resolve.
Yeah.
So-
Meaning it take 5 votes.
Being thoughtful. The one last on that, are you suggesting close that and use it for anything else, or close it, take it down, and
We didn't make a proposal
Gotcha.
on
On
what's
any of
going to
them.
happen.
On any
It's-
of them.
we'll
Okay.
do that if we get to that point of actually doing this job.
but one last thing, because the demographics change in neighborhoods. In that neighborhood, do we know how many school-age children there are?
We can pull that data by the census data is the closest thing we have, but those are just estimates at this point since the census was
Gotcha.
so many years
That's
ago.
good. All right.
So when we're undescribed, consolidate means close, right?
Right.
And demolish, or just close and figure out later?
Close and figure it out. If y'all want us to go forward with any of these recommendations, then we would then have that conversation.
So for me also, in addition to the academics, I think when we're consolidating, of course, some children are going to be closer, but then others are going to be further away. And so we'll need to look at the transportation. That needs to be figured into it also. What is there an increase in transportation? I would think with some of these it would be, and what that looks like and what that amount is and how far these children are going to be riding, those type of things. Certainly those are going to be things that parents are going to know when we go to these community meetings. They already know it. So
Yeah.
we
So-
need to go ahead, and the board needs to understand that too.
Absolutely, and we'll bring that information forward as we go through the process at the will of the board.
So, sorry.
Yep.
Everything else? Yes.
Just going back to what Superintendent Hobson stated, when we talk about putting students who haven't received the greatest facilities and buildings, that should be a plus for all of us. But it's also imperative, if we look back at all the mergers that we have did, are those students better off now than they were before? And if the question is no, it's not. We want our children in state-of-the-art buildings, so let's not get that twisted. But what we also want is to make sure that whatever the academic struggle was, as a district, it's imperative for the staff to make sure that those plans are put in place. So when we talk about student needs, not just the facility needs, student needs, community needs assessment, family assessments, just making sure that we do everything. So I'm all for new buildings. But we can't put a struggling school and merge it with another struggling school, and that academic plan is not strong, so we have 2 struggling schools in one. So I know what we need, but I also know that our children need something else besides a new building. Yep.
So we've learned a lot in these last 6 years, Ms. Love, around closing schools, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think the blueprint, the one time where we've done combining schools, build new schools, put the additional resources in, great principals and great teachers, was West Haven Elementary. And so West Haven now is in its third year. We combined, I think to your point, 3 struggling schools, 2 of which were on the list and 1 of them was on the teetering on the list. And now that school in its first 2 years of existence has been a reward school because we did exactly what you're saying. We put the right resources in, we made it an I-zone, we got the right community involvement. So I think that to your point, it's absolutely right. Like there have been other closures that we've had way back when, really for, trying to balance the budget and do those kinds of things. And, we didn't think all the way through around the academic support. So I think that now we do have a blueprint and we have a program of work that has been proven where if you do these things and you support kids socially, emotionally, academically, and all that, you can not only make sure they don't backslide, but you can have accelerated student achievement, I think, like what you're seeing at West Haven. And so I think the thinking around all this is exactly that. It's not just throw kids in a building, but when you have $20 million more to invest, then you invest in a social emotional learning. You make sure that you provide incentives for the best teachers to be there. You make sure you give them longer school days and do all those kinds of things. So I think that is exactly right, because the main thing has to be, it can't be saving money, it can't just be shiny things. It's got to be to accelerate student achievement. I think that's exactly what's happening in West Haven, and we suspect that with the same or similar supports and then tailored supports based on the neighborhood, that's the main objective with what we're talking about.
All right, so we got a lot of slides to get through. Thank you, Superintendent. Let's go to slide 12.
Slide 12.
Slide 12 is the proposal to build a new Orange Mountain Elementary School. This doesn't necessarily have to be an elementary school. It could be a K-8 or any sort of thing when we start having this conversation. But it was to consolidate Bethel Grove, Dunbar, and Cherokee into one new state-of-the-art school. Those schools are all within about 1.5 miles of each other. And they're all pretty small. Their enrollments are pretty small.
But make sure no questions.
Any questions? Slide 12.
Hold on. Ms. Coleman?
When we combine all these schools, are we looking for a central location? Because when we were talking about closing Dunbar, that was one of the issues where, because Bethel Grove, you're having to cross a major intersection to get to the school. So I think the location is the most vital part. And then also, where is the middle school that we're feeding this, that we're going to feed into? I know Sherwood Middle is part, but what else are we looking at for the Orange Mountain community?
We have not looked for land yet. We have not gotten that far in the process. But as far as the middle school goes, this could be a K-8 and it could have a middle school in it as well. So it would just be one big Melrose feeder. Right now, there are a lot of middle school kids that are going to Hanley because they put a K-8, they grew a K-8 out of that ASD. So having some conversations around that is important too.
And I think too, Ms. Coleman, that also just highlights another opportunity where we can work, try to work plan with the ASD, because Hanley's in terrible shape too.
You mean the bill?
Okay, to go to 13.
Any other questions?
Didn't get a chance to ask this question from slide 10.
You move back?
Yep.
Numbers in front of me. You're saying 12 kids going from West Haven to Whitehaven, 77 from West.
As we move forward at the will of the board and offer ideas.
I did hear in a past meeting, Mr. Woods talking about, particularly in the inner city, that there's a lack of sports fields, and we've all talked about that as we're adding gymnasiums.
Yep.
If we get money from Shelby County, repurposed. I think, did y'all get that repurposed?
No.
But that we should look at that when we take something down.
Absolutely.
Because there needs to be a place for people to play. And I hadn't been over. I know where the Oak Haven campus is, but I haven't been over there in a long time, and I can't remember. My office was right over near there. I just hadn't seen it in a while, and don't remember.
But yeah, stadiums are one of the items that we have to work through, just like alternative programs and CCTE. We still have a little bit of work to do.
Yeah, I got you. That's good. But so, I don't know the numbers exactly, Mr. Burt, Dr. Burt. If you've got 292 students that Oak Haven High School does, well, let's just use all 3 of them. Wooddale, 451, 499. You don't even get an assistant principal, do you?
automatically get assistant principal. The question will be around that second P and P or VP, but they all
What's
have
a VP?
assistant vice principal.
Vice
The
principal.
larger school, they get the help with those.
With bad mics, you get bad mics at, just yell, that's fine. Okay, thanks. I was just curious because it seems like they might not even have football teams. Not that that's the most important, that's an extracurricular, but it's hard to field a football team, maybe not a basketball team with 290 some students or. They all have that. Gotcha. Thanks.
If I may add to Mr. Orber just quickly, as he noted, you have 2 of those schools on the priority list, and I do note, you know, the outgoing commissioner's discussion around, focus around trying to take over new schools in Memphis and Shelby County. And I think that, I think with all these schools, you have, I guess, Sherwood, Sheffield Elementary is a feeder, it's I-zone, and then I think we have an I-zone feeder pattern. So there certainly would be an opportunity to invest more dollars in the new high school, specifically around instruction.
Okay, going on to 16. All right.
16
Slide 16.
is building a new Hickory Hill Area Elementary School and consolidating Crump Elementary and Ross Elementary into the new building. As an alternative to that, we could rezone a small section of Crump to Hickory Ridge Elementary and then split Ross between Crump and Highland Oaks Elementary. So that's an either or as well. Both of those options do recommend keeping the Ross addition that we built and finding a new use for that land. One thought was that we could just build it a cafeteria and it could be used as a southeast alternative school, because we don't have an alternative school down in the southeast. But that's just one suggestion. We could come up with a lot.
Ross has got renovated.
Ross got an addition, that's all. And then they had a bad wall issue that got fixed. Ross still has $6.8 million of deferred maintenance in that main building.
When did we do this?
Probably 7, 8 years ago.
Okay.
Slide 17.
I have a question. I have a
Oh,
question.
sorry.
Ross Elementary, when you say merge Ross with Crump,
Right.
So Ross would be empty
Right.
or Crump? Which?
Both. The first option is that we would build a new school and both schools would go into the new school. The second option is that we would rezone a little bit of Crump and close Ross into Crump and Highland Oak. So it would be Ross in that instance.
So this would be because of the FCI and the academics?
Right, so it's not the academics, but it's $6.8 million in deferred maintenance at Ross alone. So, and it's got a 28 FCI, and it's really underutilized.
So why would we put the alternative students over there?
That was just a suggestion.
Oh.
I'm not proposing that. We were just thinking of different kinds of uses we could use. But the main building of Ross is the one with the deferred maintenance, not the new addition. So we would get rid of the.
So we would use the new addition
Right.
for, okay.
Yeah.
Those schools are down in Hickory Hill. So back in the 90s, the city of Memphis built schools, 4 schools in Hickory Hill. And there was a bond issue. And part of our settlement with the city of Memphis 3 years ago was by the end of what year? Did we get all the transfers done of all the property back and forth between the city of Memphis?
I would need to ask our attorney.
So you remember we did the settlement with the city of Memphis over the 2008, $58 million that we didn't get paid as a maintenance of effort. And we went through 3 or 4 years of negotiations, and we finally settled it. Herman Morris, who's our board attorney, I think was involved in the settlement, as was the superintendent, and Ms. Speakman when she was here. And part of that settlement was there were pieces of property, parks, and other stuff that belonged to the school board, the Memphis City Schools, that now were Shelby County Schools, that the city was using. Community centers, and Sea Isle comes to mind. Then there were school properties that, including the 4 in Hickory Hill that were built, that were going to be deeded over to us, all of it for $1. We were just doing a swap to straighten up everything. And if you remember, part of that $38 million settlement was there was about $3.5 million worth of construction that, because the city can't issue bonds on somebody else's property, that in their capital improvement budget would go to fix those schools up. And we did that work, and then after that was completed, they could be transferred over. So it was a lot of properties, Crump Stadium, 3 or 4 community centers, McWhorter Center was one I remember. I mean, there was a park here, half the school. It's just because it was all together, it was just, we're going to build a park, so hey, you buy the land. I mean, it wasn't arm's length, but we solved all that, and we made an agreement that at the end of some year it would be solved. The only reason I'm asking about this is because they might have been included. I know Hickory Hill Middle and Elementary were included in that, and I can't remember the rest of them. But Ms. Urban?
Yes, there were some transfers done, I believe, when I first arrived at the district about 2 years ago. I'm not sure if those are the same, but what I'd like to do is go back and confirm to see if those are the same properties. I can dig into that and see where we are.
Mr. Morris has recollection of it. Alan Wade with the city council has, because they were part of it. And Ricky Wilkins was part of it. Was Nathan Bix part of that? No, Dinkelspiel, Bob Dinkelspiel was a part of that. And Valerie Speakman and the superintendent were all a part of that. And it took a long time, but I think that we had a deadline, and that school might have been in there, those schools. So we just want to make sure it's done. I don't think there's any rancor or anybody holding out. It just doesn't need to be forgotten. And,
I have the agreement and all the schools, and I'll forward them to you. And I believe, in my memory, it was 2019 was the date, but that could be wrong.
That could be fine.
I'll get back with you. But
Okay.
these schools were not involved in that. It was Germanshire and Windridge were the others. Remember those?
You need to keep her. She's got institutional knowledge. I'm telling you.
I didn't want to interrupt.
We're raising the hickory. It's good.
All right.
All right.
Okay to go to 17? Okay, yeah, absolutely.
So slide 17 are additions at 3 schools. The additions would go at Brownsville Road Elementary, Grandview Heights Middle, and Lucy Campbell Elementary. That would allow for that Dexter Elementary rezoning that we were speaking about earlier. We need to rezone kids out of Dexter to Brownsville Road before we can rezone kids into Dexter from the White Station area. So the other two, Grandview Heights Middle School, we could consolidate Georgian Hills Middle into Grandview Heights Middle if we expand Grandview Heights. And finally, Lucy Campbell, if we put an addition on Lucy Campbell, then we could consolidate Scenic Hills into Lucy Campbell.
So what's the capacity at Lucy E. Campbell? Is that,
So today, the capacity at Lucy Campbell is 575, and it's at 88%, so that's why we would need an addition to take in the Scenic Hills kids.
so that would be a new building?
It would be a new classroom addition building, so like a new wing, basically.
Okay, on the back of it. And when you say consolidate Georgian Hills to Grandview, you said you're going to add an addition to it?
To Grandview, right.
Okay. So I guess my question would be, are you going to make the school 6th through 8th grade friendly? Because they still have elementary school equipment in there. As it relates to the bathroom, the water fountains, are you going to, and then are we considering the cafeteria area? Because my daughter attends that school and they eat lunch around 10:30, 10:45. So when you talk, and it's a 4 o'clock school, so when you talk about bringing more students in, are you going to expand the cafeteria? And what's the cafeteria space at Lucy E. Campbell now? Because we don't want our children to eat lunch at 9:30 because of the space.
Right, so on the slide, you'll see that we recommended that all deferred maintenance and renovation projects be included in the ask.
Okay, so is that something that you're going to bring back to us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
So the last slide that I'll speak to is
18.
slide 18, and it's consolidate schools into newer existing buildings. So this doesn't involve any builds. It involves buildings that we already have that are in good condition or in newer condition and have space to hold a neighboring school. So these are Alton into A.B. Hill, Westwood High into Mitchell High, and Hamilton Middle School and Hamilton Elementary School, making it a K-8.
All right, so my question would be around Hamilton Middle to Hamilton Elementary. While, because I spent a lot of time in both of those schools, if you're saying that you would consolidate them to kind of a pre-K-8 building, and you're going to avoid over $3 million in deferred maintenance, are you then coming back saying that you're going to invest in the Hamilton Elementary building that needs work as well in order to make this happen?
Yes.
And will we get that plan
Yes.
along? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So, Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Orville, if this plan was to be approved, you're going to have to acquire quite a bit of land. Typically, obviously, this is going to be subject to board approval. Is there any recommendations around acquiring any property prior to such a vote, knowing that those prices will likely skyrocket as soon as they know that, as soon as this plan becomes public? Or is there, could you work with your real estate partners to try to start looking at potential properties? Any thoughts around that?
So I was going to say, I remember this from A. Maceo Walker, which used to be Al's Golf Haven, and because I did business with them, and so this was MCS was very wise about this. I'm sure you will be too. They just hired a broker off the list because we've got an approved list, and they didn't announce who it was for. You had kind of a straw buyer, which I hope you all still have that policy, Mr. Woods, because sometimes you can get down to one piece of property in the neighborhood that fits. So he's got a very good point. I would hope that you would do it that way, because if you announce first,
Yep.
and you're absolutely right.
And then my follow-up question, particularly around a lot of board members' comments around seeing formalized plans. Do we have the internal capacity? You know, this is a major investment, and then you talk about deploying these type of resources in this number of facilities. When you bring your recommendations more detailed, I know Superintendent indicated this was a high-level presentation, but I think you need to make sure, if we particularly going to be lobbying the county commission to support this, that I hope that request includes resources for internal project management resources as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll be part of our assessment to identify for the board what we would need in terms of resources to push the plan forward, to bring you the information that you need.
All right, and as we get toward the end of this presentation, Superintendent, this question is for you, maybe the question that you may have already gotten, but would love to hear you articulate to board members. Knowing that we're in a process within 24 hours naming an interim superintendent, you transitioning out, why bring this plan to the board at this time, and then your vision or your thoughts or your instructions to the team that will be left behind to implement such a plan? Any thoughts or anything you want to leave with the board around that?
So I think great question, Mr. Woods. I know I've been asked for this, I think, for the board for a while, and I've consistently said we're working on it, and I didn't want to just drop this on somebody else's lap. I also think at the end of the day that, you know, in my circles, you know, you ask, you know, what do you call a superintendent who closes schools? A former superintendent. So I think that expecting an interim or a new person to even really, you know, look at this and even propose this would probably be a lot to ask somebody to do it. So I think if it's not the right time and the board, you know, doesn't want to do it, then you got an easy person you can yell at and tell them go put it back on the shelf. I think also the county commission, I think I saw Commissioner Whaley, who may have left, and numerous commissioners have been asking for this for a couple of years, and I know they said very specifically in connection with this year's budget, they wanted to have some discussions about facilities. I know Beth and our team, as you guys can see, have been working on this for a really long time, so certainly wanted to raise it with the board for discussion, and then get direction from the board as to how the board wants to proceed, or if it wants to proceed at all.
So I guess my general comment about there were a lot of comments about being happy to bring back recommendations. We've gotten this far, but we haven't thought to the next level. For me, I think that I know this was just the first conversation, so I'm looking forward to the next level. But I don't think that that the next level should be without community input. I know our policy does not require it, but inevitably when we bring these great plans that are thought out, that really work for the district, they don't tend to work for the people in the community. Those people, those families, I would rather hear from them on the front end what their concerns are, and then go back and craft a plan, rather than bringing a plan and then have a meeting to close and try to deal with that as though with all those moving parts. So I would hope that when you've gone to the next level and you thought of all these things, there will be some community input on the front end to anticipate those challenges and to have answers and solutions from them before we get to the actual closure community meetings.
So I think that's a great point, Board Member Jones, and as we look at next steps, I think other than the recommendations which we're thinking about bringing in January, just around those rezonings close to the house, which triggers a bunch of community meetings. You know, we develop community engagement and communication plan, I think is, we know this is very important to the board, and this is a lot. I mean, it's about, roughly a $700 million investment in our schools. It's a lot of moving parts, and, as I said, we've learned a lot over 6 years, and we know that none of this goes anywhere without, robust community engagement. I will push back a little bit, though, Board Member Jones, because I think that oftentimes if you say, hey, community, what do you think about, whatever, without people having all the data, if you charge the community with coming up with a plan, it tends to go different places versus if you use your best thinking and then have some proposals and then get a reaction from the community and then make adjustments as appropriate there. So I do think at the end of the day, this is really about just kind of a first conversation and first steps about what it would look like to build 10 new schools and put 15,000 kids in brand new buildings and save $20 million and eliminate $100 million in deferred maintenance and be able to invest back in those schools. But obviously community engagement is a big part of that.
Board Member Jones touched on one of the things I was going to speak about, but another thing, Superintendent, I would hope that there's a conversation with the employees in the building, because as this is going on, I'm constantly receiving messages. I would hope that there's a conversation with them, especially the principals, because parents, when they see it on the media and they've been seeing the tweets from Commercial Appeal, they're going to go to the principals. So I would hope that there is a conversation had with the principals, maybe with some bullet points. This is a recommendation. Nothing has been set in stone. The board, we're going to make sure that we're very thoughtful on this, because a lot of times we say things, but our principals and the people in the building, they don't really have the correct information to tell their parents. So I would hope that some sort of communication would be sent out to them.
So you're absolutely right, Ms. Love. We actually I had my last principals meeting today, and we shared, at a high level, and then we have a plan to get them some more communication. But I do think, and I know people see headlines, and as we've been saying, this is just, laying out, a path. I've been crystal clear that there are a lot of things that have to happen. First and foremost, the board has to sign on towards continue moving it forward, because if not, it goes nowhere. Secondly, the county commission has to commit to funding new schools, because this plan does not work unless there's new construction to absorb these schools that would be consolidated into the new schools. So it's so preliminary, and there's so many things that have to happen, and we've been messaging that, and we'll continue to message that.
Yes, sir. The other thing, County Commission update plan.
So in the last board meeting, I believe it was Board Member Woods had indicated, if we were going to brief the county commission, because they all knew we were going down on Wednesday, that we would share with you what we were going to speak with them about. And so the intent for tomorrow's discussion was to kind of give a background of Shelby County Schools for the new commissioners, and how we've closed, I think, almost 35 schools over 10 years. We would talk a little bit about the status of the capital projects and where they are, and then we were going to give them an overview of this program, because they have been asking me, obviously, each time we go to brief, as you all know, because you come out and support that activity, what is the 5-year capital program. So we wanted to give them an update based on this material, maybe not as much detail. And then, there may be some conversation, and I'll hand the mic over to Lynn.
So there will also be some conversation related to the capital amendment that we had for $13 million. Beth, I, Commissioner Whaley, and also the CFO, Wanda Richards, we had a very productive conversation. I think we got to a good place in terms of that capital amendment moving forward, and that will likely be a part of the discussion tomorrow as well.
Thank you. Any questions?
One statement as you are getting ready to move forward, I guess, in whether it's media to county commission, just a housekeeping kind of thing, go back in and make sure that the districts for each area are correct, because I caught some of that.
If you have some, will you send them?
I will do that.
Thank you so much. That's like me catching a typo. That's just as important. I wanted to ask, while we're here, we have, and this could be a Lynn, Beth question. The last few years, in its wisdom, when it warranted it, the board closed some schools, and then we spend money boarding them up, but they're generally in areas, as we've all talked about, that we've consolidated schools for some of the same reasons you went into. But the worst thing we can do to community is leave a reminder that of a 60-year-old building that's we're never going to reopen again. So I asked you for a list, and there were 6 schools that the board's already voted to demo. And those were, and there's 2, Fairley and Longview, that you're in the middle of, and I guess it's as funds become available that we're demoing right now. And so that's good, and I think that's fair to the neighborhood. And maybe someone can transition into soccer, whatever, the baseball, football. So Carnes, Kansas, you remember at Kansas we talked about the auto dealers, and then we didn't work out anything, and so I think that's slated for demo. I thought that the county vector control was going over there. Did that never get worked out?
It got vandalized so badly, they didn't want it anymore.
So they stayed over at CBU, or right behind CBU?
They are still over there now. I don't know what their plan is going forward, but that's where they are right now.
Gotcha. So that's what happens at Lincoln. We closed. So MLK transition, Walker, White's Chapel, all have been approved. We've got the funds, Lynn, to demo those?
Yes, so I've been working with Beth to identify funds to do demolition for those projects and more.
Got you. So that leaves, there are about 7 other schools, Corning Graves, Northside, Rains Haven, Southside, Vance Middle, that all have sat for a long time that the board's never brought to us. And there's Georgia, which is encumbered because we gave a deal to South City that we would negotiate with them until next March or April. But, I mean, I'd like to see in front of the committee or the board, and Lynn, I'd like to see the funds, because I think we do a disservice to the neighborhood. There's nothing worse than having a boarded up house. School's the same thing, that's vandalized, that people are sleeping in. It's a danger to the neighborhood. And if we have no intention of opening a school back in there, and we obviously don't, none of those figured in the plans, I think we should find the funds to do that, because it's the right thing to do for the neighborhood.
I would agree, especially, thank you, Beth. I would agree, especially with some of the costs that we spend, operating costs to, for example, security, just to secure a building, or for some of these buildings as well. There might be utility costs just to make sure that pipes don't freeze and those type of things.
Does anybody else, I mean, go ahead, Ms. Love. Yeah.
Footprint analysis, Superintendent, these are recommendations based on the facilities assessment that was conducted by conducted for SCS.
Yes.
Superintendent. And I'm asking this because I know that there are buildings that we have where the Achievement School District and some of our charter operators are inside of those buildings. So at some time in the near future, well, I don't know if you guys have done it yet, but do we actually have a true facility assessment for all buildings that belong to Shelby County Schools? And what's the deferred maintenance on all of those buildings? Because when we talk about, even in my district, merging schools, closing schools, we have a lot of other school operators who are in buildings that are not conducive for the children. So how is that conversation going to work, even with the Achievement School District saying that they want to take over more schools? And they'll take the schools over, but then we'll be left with fixing a building that we already said was not conducive for our children.
So I think that's a great point, Ms. Love, and I forgot to mention that, because what this does not include, when we first started doing this, we said we're looking at, there are a lot of bad buildings in the ASD. But then we said, well, you know, at this point, we really can't force anybody to do anything with those buildings, so let's focus on what we can control. I will say we did meet myself, Dr. Ray, Lynn, Brian, with Candace McQueen, Dr. Griffin earlier this week around that very thing. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we've encouraged them to talk to us about a consolidation plan with those buildings too, because they've got probably 30 buildings, and many of those buildings are in bad shape. And I think to your point, we have done a full facilities condition study for the whole district, including those buildings, and many of those buildings are in very bad shape too.
So can you send me the ones that are in my district? Because, you know, when we start having those conversations with the community, I need to be able to have the whole picture, not just the schools that we operate, but all of our buildings.
So there's a big study. Was it divided by districts? Or was it just schools?
It was buildings.
It was, so it's probably that big, and yeah,
We can get it to you.
and the whole study too, because I remember the study was done 2 years ago. It predates you.
Yeah, it predated me, so 14,
Sarita,
15. Yep.
Sarita, it was done in 15. So I'll tell you some of the highlights, that we had like 200 and some buildings, and that 140 of them were 40 years or older, which is past the useful life of a building. And if it's an older area, like probably the area that you represent, I mean, people have lived there for a long time. It's an older part of the city, and the buildings are old. And the deferred maintenance was between $450 and $500 million. So it's a lot. I mean, it's
Mr. Orville.
Yeah, I just want to be able to give a true picture of my entire district.
And
So
it did include the schools that happen to be up in that area that are ASD. It included all buildings that we own, including this building and others.
Mr. Orville, on the demolition questions or comments that were being made, I'm looking at date authorization of a demo back into 2016. What happens at the moment that we authorize a demolition? You saying that we then wait 2-3 years to find funding? So here's my thoughts on that. Much like when you bring a recommendation to us to buy bread, you already have funding for bread. When you bring a recommendation and this body approves a demolition, the funding needs to have already been identified. Because what we didn't go out is tell our community and our stakeholders that we've approved demolition for a facility. Because do we wait in perpetuity? Like, we should know that that funding is available. And we've also stated, maybe not through resolution, but publicly, that when we make a recommendation for a facility to close, if we do not find a utilization for that facility within a certain time period, you should be bringing a recommendation back for demolition. And the irony of a facility that I'm looking at right now that was authorized in August of 17 for demolition, Mr. Chair, was also a meeting that we just left out of, where we're talking about now giving it to a charter school. So that I don't follow the logic in that, if knowing that we've already have made a recommendation, either due to the facility index or other reasons. If we chose to demolish that facility, how then does it become before us by another division to now be given to another entity? Any thoughts on how, because it had to have come to you, right, to facilities to recommend giving the school away, but yet this body has already authorized it to be demoed.
Right, so I think what the resolution said on these specific demolitions was that it authorized the superintendent to proceed with the demolition, and then the discussion was always that we would have to find funding, and that it would come back to you again, because then you'd have to approve the demolition contract with the vendor. So that's how that worked. The charter school recommendations, now when a charter asks for something for free, it goes to the charter school office first, not to us.
So you didn't want to mention to them, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, Mr. Chair, but that school was already listed for demolition?
I wasn't in that meeting, I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, if that school was already on this list, did that school come to you saying, hey, we have a charter that's interested in the school? When you pull that school up, do you see it on your list for to be demoed?
Yes, I see it on my list as approved for superintendent to proceed, but there hasn't been any funding for these specific schools.
Okay, so we can talk offline on that. I'm just curious.
So we do have funding on that 6 that we've approved.
Yes, remember last year we also earmark funding in terms of the fund balance for demolition. We'll identify funding for those 6, and me and Beth, we've been in conversation to see whether we can extend that further.
Okay, great. Ms. Bibb.
Thank you, Chair. So I think to Board Member Woods' point was one of the things that I just brought up when we talked about this particular facility in our conversation around free facilities, and I think Board Member Love just mentioned it as well. I think we have to be able to close those gaps when we're talking about we're doing these types of processes regarding facilities. My ask in the meeting we just left out of was give the full history of Lincoln, and I think within that, this is an example of why we have to know what the left and right hand are doing.
So, anybody else? Okay. So, I think it's irresponsible, not of y'all, but Ms. Butler, how many years have you been with the system? Sarita, I'm sorry. How many years have you been with Memphis City and Shelby County? Thank you for your service. And I can't remember if you were in facilities always or operations always, but when this board, which would have been Teresa, Kevin, and myself that were on the board, we had facilities that have been sitting there 25 years that were boarded up and vacant. And I think under your leadership and some others, we've probably taken down 10 or 12 buildings in the last 5 years. And communities would complain, the grass would be overgrown, the buildings were boarded up, or people living in them. I mean, I remember Florida Elementary, we took down, Capeville, we took down, we closed Graceland, we took it down. Yeah, I mean, we've done a great job, and I think we need to continue. So I don't think we sat and did nothing. We've been more active really since Kevin and Teresa and I have been on the board together. But no, but we've been more active doing that than we've ever been. But it's not fair to the communities. And the best example is Melrose, the old Melrose High School. That's the city of Memphis's building that we had no responsibility for, but it's been vacant for how long? 30 years? 30 years. Yeah. Yeah, we have no responsibility for that. That's the city's responsibility. They own it. But, so, no one likes to live next to that. So, I'm hoping we see a recommendation and that Lynn takes a cut in salary and then we can afford to demo some building. Yes. All right, does anybody have anything else? All right. Everybody who stayed late that works here, thank you. That was a long meeting. And nothing else? Staff, great job. I know it's just the beginning. You know we're going to have a lot of questions just from what you heard, but we look forward to hearing your proposal. So thank you guys and
Thanks to
your staff.
Michelle. Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
meeting adjourned.